Welcome to Governance 101. This is kind of the preliminary course for people who might want to be directors, new directors. There will be no tests. So today we want to welcome Sheila Rapetta, Future Sense.
One of the challenges that we came across was that a lot of people didn't know what to expect when joining a board. What does it mean to be on the board? We heard a lot of, oh, someone told me I'd be good at this, or I got into this, I had no idea it was going to be this much work, or I didn't know this is what it was like. And so today what we're doing, this course, and it's being recorded for future viewers, really the goal of this, so you know, is to be shown or given prior to an election. So that way, people who may be wondering, should I do this? What are the expectations? What does this mean? Have a better understanding of the role of a director and the expectations. We are going to review a little bit of the trust at some point in time. It's a complicated document. There are complicated bylaws. There's a lot that is gray and not so black and white. I'm going to start with, I am not a lawyer. I am not purporting to be a lawyer. What I'm simply doing when we get to that section is to just report out so it's at least documented somewhere. This is what is said in terms of roles and responsibilities of a director. All right, ready to jump in? So today really what we want to look at is what are the reasons people would be running for the board? Secondly, reviewing the trust and governance structure of Laguna Woods Village. Again, some of this is currently under review. We know it is I always like to call a living, breathing document. Clarifying expectations for the roles and expectations and roles for the directors, and then talking a little bit about ethics and governance. It's a tough issue. Any ethical issues, there's a lot of black and white in this world, and then there's a lot of gray. And so talking about what are some approaches that boards can take to manage ethical issues that will arise when you're in a board position. So when people are considering running for the board, we heard a lot of, my friend told me it would be a good idea, I heard I'd be good at it, there was this one thing I really wanted to change, so I thought I've got to get involved. And so there's a lot of reasons for running for the board. Some people, I even heard, I missed working, I wanted to be busy. So questions to ask people before running for office, if they're going to run for the board, and things to even just consider yourself, or if you're talking to someone who might be interested. Asking them, have you ever attended a board meeting? Have you ever watched a board meeting? Do you know what's really going on? Do you understand the structure of the job and what's expected of you, what you need to know? Secondly, how long have you been a resident of Laguna Woods Village? There's a balance between new, fresh ideas and also knowing the structure, knowing the people, and knowing the implications of decisions that are made. So knowing the organization is really important when running for a board position. Have you ever attended a committee meeting? Committees are a great way for people to get their feet wet into governance and understanding the role of governance without actually having to run for election and getting involved in the board. They can see kind of the process and procedure, and it kind of shortens the learning curve a little bit as well. What is your career background? And this is what's really fascinating, is that there's a lot of opportunities. So many people say, well, I wasn't in business. I just don't know. Well, given the nature of what it takes to run Laguna Woods Village, it's an entire city. So everybody's needed. So considering, especially even for people who are thinking about who to vote for, do you have a balance of career backgrounds? Do you have at least knowledge of, business principles, practices? But just because you weren't maybe if you're a librarian or a school teacher, if you have value that you can bring to the organization and you have a skill set that's useful, even if you don't have a business background. But considering that business background and the skills and competencies needed to be successful can help build your board to be stronger. Again, that leads into expertise or background in specific areas. So kind of making sure, especially as elections roll around, do we have a balance of skill sets on our board to make sure that we're making decisions that are going to really make our community better and our organization better. And then what is your financial literacy level? For some people, they'll say this is maybe not as relevant, but it's important that at a minimum, anyone running on a board has some financial literacy, that they can understand the budget and how the budgeting process works, and if not, they get educated on that. in advance. There are plenty of actually online classes you can take for free for people who don't have this skill set. But for those considering to run for the board, make sure you have an understanding of what finances look like, how all the impacts and the fallout, and how reports can be read for the financials of your organization. Then you've got to look at the person, their competency and their character. What does it take to be a good board director? And this is for all not-for-profits. They've done a study, Not-Profit Times actually did a study and looked at what makes a board member most successful in terms of actually executing on advocating for their organization and actually governing, as well as what makes them a good board member just to work with. Because that's really important. You guys spend just a few hours a week working together, and you want to make sure you're working with people and volunteering with people that are going to be good compatriots in it. So the first thing is integrity. Independence, mature confidence, corporate manners, a sense of context, courage, and commitment. So when it comes to integrity, their definition that works best in governance is demonstrating a zero tolerance for unethical behavior, not just for themselves, but also for their colleagues. It's looking out for and looking for opportunities to make sure that we are behaving ethically. Are we kind of skirting areas? Because ethics and integrity are very slippery slope, right? We make one kind of questionable decision and it's very easy to start making more and more. So do you have a great sense of integrity and that when you see unethical behavior, you're willing to call it out? The second one is independence. So this means that you have no unique business or financial or personal relationships or hoped for relationships that could create a conflict of interest. To make sure that there's even an appearance or perception, and that's really important because sometimes you may know it's on the up and up, but psychologically there's a great study about what people do when they don't have knowledge, and it's been replicated over and over again. When people don't know something, we as humans fill in with the worst case scenario. People will perceive the worst case scenario, and that's why that perception, even if you know in your heart of hearts that this is on the up and up, people do. There's definitely not a gossip mill out there, right? People will fill in with the worst case scenario. So it's really important that ethics and integrity are at the center of a director's qualities and characteristics. The next one, I love how they call this mature confidence. It's the ability to speak out and actively participate in board deliberations. This is with the caveat that it has to be done well, it has to be done respectfully, and with a corporate sense of mannership, which we'll talk about. But are you willing to, when the hard decision comes, if you know it's the wrong decision for your community, even if you are, you're the only one standing on that side of the fence, are you willing to be that voice? Because you are the advocate for your community. That is countered by the next one, which is just as important. You can speak out loud, you can speak the truth, but you have to do it in a way that has corporate manners. So you are a representative to your community. And from what I understand, almost every single one of the board meetings are televised. People are watching, and they see that you are the leaders and setting the direction for your community. And that goes beyond the walls of Laguna Woods Village. People are watching. And so is there civility? Those expectations of your behavior are going to be kind, respectful, listening actively. So their definition was recognizing the difference between productively participating discussions and counterproductively dominating deliberations. So that can come in terms of volume. Are we yelling? Or are we kindly, respectfully talking to one another? Are you following Robert's Rules of Order? Doesn't mean you have to follow every single one of them, but are we waiting, or are there outbursts at meetings? So much of the decisions that are made actually have to be a compromise. It may be more towards one direction or the other, but governance decisions are very rarely, there's usually a solution somewhere in the middle ground if there's opposing parties. Somebody who makes a good director and an effective director can have civilized conversations that are done with 80% of their, up to 95, depending on the studies, of the language being nonverbal, that's our communication, that can be done in a way that is respectful and it's productive. And if it's not productive, I'll go back to integrity. Are you willing to be the one to call time out and say, no, we're not being productive today. We've got to step back. That's part of being a good director as well. The next thing is a sense of context. And this one can be really hard in governance, and we're going to talk a little bit about this because there's governance and there's management, and it's kind of a murky line in between. When are you managing and when you're governing? And the role of a board member is to really govern an organization. So the sense of context means you make relevant, informed comments focused on the specific aspect and issue of things being considered. So a good board member, even in the midst of a conversation, they may have an opinion. If they know they haven't done their due diligence and research, they abstain. And if somebody asks their opinion, they say, I have not done enough research. They have the willingness and ability to say, I can't chime in yet. And also being able to stay on topic. You have a lot of decisions to make in a short period of time. And so how do you help your entire board do that better? It's by helping stay on time, or on topic, so that way you can move the conversations to be productive. And the last one's courage. And this is really the willingness to do the right thing and make that tough decision even when it's unpopular. Again, this goes back to also doing this in a way that has corporate manners, that it's done respectfully, but also knowing that you are advocating for your community and you are putting your best foot forward to help make decisions that are going to better your community through your governance of your board. When it comes to commitment, it's understanding that to be an effective board member, it requires the time, the heart, and the standards to make the enterprise successful. So for your organization, do you have the time? Are you going to be able to put in the time to do the board meetings and the committee meetings and do your homework in between? It's not an easy job. It's a time-consuming job. And some people don't come in knowing how much it's really going to consume. From what I heard between 15 and 40 hours a week, depending on the person. Is that about a fair assessment? Yeah. It's a part-time job, close to full-time sometimes. And so are you willing to put in that time and that effort? If you're only doing part of the job, then it's a disservice to your organization and it's a disservice to the boards. So we've kind of looked at why you would join the board, the qualities of a good director, but what makes a board strong? Once you get everyone elected in office, what makes a board good? The first one is passion. And I say that and some of you are going to go, oh, we have passion. We got passion, all right. But you have to have a sense of passion, because if you're apathetic, are you really going to want to do your homework about what needs to be done? When we're driven by an internal sense of purpose, many people, it's altruistic. I want to make my community better. When you have that driving you, and you remember that's your sense of purpose, the work gets easier to do. The second thing is knowledge. Each board member must have working knowledge of the organization. When we operate on assumptions, we get in trouble. So it's imperative that people take the time to get educated and really understand how things are working. And that's why understanding, what does the trust look like? I think even within the boards and what we've heard from when we talk to people in the community, there's a lot of misinformation out there. You can educate your constituents on what your role is or isn't, and that helps clarify some of the muck or mire that might be out there. Diversity of expertise. This is really important when it comes to finding financial, legal service, other skill sets necessary to make good decisions. Do you have a balanced board who has a plethora of expertise who can see it from different perspectives? Because that gives you the big picture instead of looking at it from one narrow lens. Can they really step back and not get locked in on this is my mission? If people are running for the board, and for those who are considering, and you want to run for the board because you want to change one thing, there's something you're just so passionate about, you want it to happen, you may be better served and make actual progress towards the one thing participating in a committee. And that's the reality, because what your board needs is this big picture representation, being able to look at and say, okay, I see all of the aspects of our community, short term, long term, and I see how they all fit together, and it's complicated. But can we get a good view of it, and can we figure out how to execute? So it's not about moving one thing forward, but it's if we move this, then it's going to impact the second thing, which in 10 years will help our community execute this goal. It's having the bigger picture to see that the decisions you make now, especially when you have a shorter office, that they have long-term impact. And eventually the things you leave are going to be a problem for the next board. But there is long-term, so having continuity with people with long-term vision of the impact of decisions is really essential. So the next thing is commitment. So is your board willing to put in the time and the energy? We've all worked with somebody, no? Have we all worked with somebody before in our past and they dragged their feet? And then what happens? And this is why this is so important for a board to have everyone working. If somebody isn't as committed, can you have the hard conversation? Hey, George, we need to talk. Instead of letting him swirl and create the whirlpool that will create the vortex to suck the lives out of everybody, how do we sit down and talk to George about what can we do? It seems like you're missing these meetings. Something going on, give the benefit of the doubt. Is there anything we can help you with? Is this the right job for you? Is this what you want to be doing? Asking those questions and having the conversation. Not sitting and complaining and assuming, because it could be George has stuff going on at home. Maybe George is sick. Maybe George's partner is sick. We don't know. And so we want to make sure that we have gotten commitment and it's been expressed. Also on time, and express willingness to take part in all levels of the board service. Being a board member doesn't mean just showing up. What are all the responsibilities you have to do as a board member? So there's board meetings. We'll start with the big one everyone watching this video will know of. What are the other things you do? Research. So piano needs to be replaced. Somebody's got to figure out what the best one is, because you don't just walk into Costco and go, I'll take that one. It doesn't work that way. So do we fix or repair, or we're purchasing new? That takes time, because you have to look at the cost. You have to do research on, is the fix temporary? How long will this fix last? What's the cost annualized, right? That's a lot of research. Deadlines. And then it's taking that deadline and working backwards, and there's project planning, isn't there? This is a decision that needs to be made. This is how we need to get there, and you have to map out a process. Yes, what are the existing policies and procedures? And it's not super clear in some places, is it? What else? The historical information. So taking time to get educated, right? Why did the board make that decision 7 years ago? Where did our community come from? What other tasks take up your time? So you have to be educating yourself regularly, because the laws are constantly changing and adapting. Interacting with staff, that's a part of your time. What else? Okay, familiarity with the village. And I love that, because who are you ultimately representing? The residents. So taking the time to get out and understand, not just in your own little circle and world, but taking time to get feet on the ground to walk around. I heard some examples of people in a meeting saying, I just go through, I didn't even realize, I went to a different side of the village and didn't even realize this issue was happening. Somebody was giving an example, something with the sidewalks once. I didn't even know. It was fine by my house, so I just assumed it was okay everywhere. So getting out and really seeing what you are working towards. What other things take time outside of board meetings? Committees. And then committees that come from the committees, and the subcommittees from the subcommittees from the committee, right? Okay, so feedback and feed in from different groups, right? So you may have, you as a board member may be talking to two groups who seem to be disagreeing, but they see very different things, and you have to be the one to hear both sides of it, make sense of it, and kind of report back out. And the last thing is connection. And this is really that you started hitting on that, this idea that you're connecting with organizations, to friends and supporters. Are you out there advocating for this organization that you're working so hard for? You're putting in a ton of time. Are you out there talking to people? Are you explaining the decisions? Are you communicating out why things are being done and dispelling those myths? That sense of connection, especially in a community like yours, which is so unique and wonderful, you have a great opportunity to do that. So those are kind of the things, looking from what it takes individually to what it takes as a board and the characteristics needed. And I want to stop for a second and ask, are there questions or thoughts or responses you have to that? Because remember, this is educational for those who may be doing running for the board in the future. Boards tend to want to manage more than actually govern, and we're going to talk a little bit about what's the difference between those two. And especially in the second class, we're going to do another one of these. We'll really get into the nuts and bolts of it. But my first question is always, when there's a performance issue, what's going on? Is everything okay? Because you're giving George an opportunity to maybe tell you. He may not. But at least you're coming instead of saying, there's a problem with your performance, you're saying, indirectly, there's a problem, but I think something else might be causing this. And it gives him the opportunity. It doesn't make it an attack. It makes it a question where he's giving information. And that diffuses the situation in advance. The question I just heard, and I'm repeating it here, remember, because the recording was, it could be personal if one person goes and has that conversation with George. So there is a protocol. The things we're going to talk about in Governance 102, which is really, when you start on a new board and you have new members join, you should set your expectations right off the bat. Because if you do that, then somebody can sit down to George, usually the president, and go, hey, we agreed to be at 80% of these meetings. That was a commitment we all made. Is everything okay? Is everything all right? And then have that conversation. So there can be protocol. And every board, every time you get new members, the culture of your board changes a little bit. How it works changes because we're all different. So every board and every time there's a new election, it's going to shift a little bit, and you have to work out your best process and procedure. So I heard the question was, what if it's not a performance issue, but a personality issue? Can you give me an example of what that would look like? Maybe somebody's stepping out of turn regularly, and they're being loud, and they're being off topic, and that's it. That's actually a performance issue. If you think about it, it is. Because one of the things, if you've set as a board an agreement that we are going to move forward respectfully, and that we're going to treat each other kindly, and we are not going to talk over each other, and we're going to stay on topic, maybe their personality is to be outspoken, but now it's become a performance issue because you've set an expectation. So by setting expectations, you can manage some of the personality stuff. Because truly, a good board member should be able to turn off the personality, and I could say, hey, you and I, maybe our personalities don't jive, but for the better of this organization, we're going to try and make this work and talk kindly and respectfully. We don't have to be best friends, but we need to make this work. And so now, when we're having conflict, it's a performance issue. I'm going to repeat what you said. This is a leadership issue, and it's something that people need to know, because if you're a president, vice president, setting these expectations, that's something you have to know how to do. What was stated was that it should be an expectation that when you're coming onto a board, you have to have thick skin, and that people are going to say things that you don't like or how it's done, and you just have to let it roll off your back. And that's absolutely, and that actually got back to the characteristics of a good board member. You can stand up. That's part of standing up for the right decision and going, but doing it respectfully and kindly and with corporate manners. It's not going, I don't care, you're wrong, right? It's saying, hey, listen, we are going to agree to disagree on this one for the betterment of our board and moving forward. I'm going to let this go. I've stated my opinion. I've stated I don't agree with this decision, but since everybody else agrees on it, and I really don't think it's at the extreme detriment of our community, you figure out where it falls in that spectrum, we're going to move forward. Sometimes it is putting your sand in the ground and saying, time out. I really strongly believe this, and if you and I have a respectful relationship, you're going to trust that I'm not being stubborn for the sake of being stubborn, and that there's something there, and you have to agree, we're going to research it, or we're going to do something to figure this out, because we're not ready to make a decision. All of this comes back to just respect and expectations. If you look at every one of those items, do you set expectations as soon as you meet together as a board? How are we going to treat each other? What are our standards? And then doing it respectfully. And if people don't, being able to say, and that's why it becomes a performance issue like we were talking about, we agreed to this up front. That's out of line. That's stepping out of this. And if that person gets mad, then you're seeing the fit wasn't very great.
And then the committee just shows up and gets told what's going on.
Okay, I want to, hold on one second, because I want to repeat it so it's heard. So what you're saying is that one of the problems that we face is that when there's a committee tasked to do something, the chair essentially just runs the show, does everything, and we're not really truly delegating, is what I'm hearing. And saying, everyone, let's have this. It's just that the chair moves the meter, they make the decisions, they do the research. Is that what I'm hearing? And they call the shots, 100%?
Yeah, exactly.
So to recap what you said is that part of being a good leader as a committee lead is that you are going to commission out work, trust your team to do it back, and make sure that they report back and that you're not running everything or micromanaging it, essentially. We are not covering that today, but that is something, and I'm putting a note here that I get in a little more detail for course 2. We can even look into what that looks like. Okay. So to repeat what you said is that there comes a point where once the group has made a decision, the train is leaving the station, even if you dissented from that, because of the role of governance, you need to get on the train and everyone needs to present a unified front. And that's really critical. There are many organizations where that happens all the time. And if you went back and looked at the notes, there were various opinions, but a strong board does say, we're going to move forward and not go and sit and talk about, well, I didn't agree and I didn't agree and start stirring, because that's where we get in that vortex that's swirling again, right? And all of a sudden, we're not focused. When you get into that point where you're swirling in your whirlpool, you're not focused on your community anymore. Yeah, so to repeat what she said was there's got to be tolerance, right? Because everybody's done things for a while now, the way they've done it, right? We've lived our careers. We've all come out of organizations that had a different culture, a different way of doing things. We all have our own individual cultures that we've grown up in. There's even multiple generations with different cultural expectations and experience within the walls of this community. And being tolerant of those and understanding that's not how I do it, but it's okay for you to do it. That comes back to corporate mannerisms and respect and really going, not how I would do it, but that's your way, and having this sense of tolerance and respect for one another. Okay, so what I'm hearing is there's a time for open-mindedness, but if there's some new information found, it needs to be reconsidered. And you're right, there is a way, in a respectful way to do that, and in a way where it's not just getting shouted out or it's getting brought up. It's got to follow the rules and orders that are in place and parameters, because that's part of respectful behavior.